The roses in my hand trembled as I stood frozen in the doorway, the scent of their petals mixing with the bitter tang of betrayal. I'd spent weeks planning this moment. Our 10th anniversary, a milestone I thought we'd celebrate with laughter and love. Instead, I was staring at my wife, Emily, wrapped in the arms of another man on our living room couch. The world tilted. My heart, once buoyant with anticipation, plummeted into a cold, hollow abyss. I'd come home early, the car packed with her favorite chocolates, a bottle of vintage wine, and a reservation at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. The plan was simple: surprise her, sweep her off her feet, remind her of the spark we'd kindled a decade ago. But the scene before me was no surprise party. It was a wrecking ball. Emily's eyes met mine, wide with panic, as she pushed the man away. He scrambled to his feet, adjusting his tie, his face a mask of guilt and defiance. I didn't know him, but I'd seen him before, at a neighborhood barbecue, maybe, or one of those community events Emily dragged me to. His name didn't matter. What mattered was the way her hand lingered on his arm, the way her lips parted as if to explain, but no words came. "David," she finally whispered, my name sounding foreign in her mouth. This isn't what it looks like." I wanted to laugh, but the sound lodged in my throat. Isn't what it looks like? The half-eaten cake on the coffee table, the balloons I'd tied up that morning, the soft jazz playing from the speakers, all mocked me. I'd spent hours setting this up, sneaking around to make sure she wouldn't suspect a thing. And here she was, sneaking around too, but for a very different reason. I dropped the roses. Petals scattered across the hardwood floor like blood from a fresh wound. 10 years, I said, my voice low, trembling with a rage I didn't know I could feel. 10 years, Emily. The man, she called him Mark, mumbled something about leaving, grabbing his jacket from the armrest. I stepped aside, not because I wanted to, but because my legs felt like they might give out if I didn't move. He brushed past me, avoiding my gaze, and disappeared into the night. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving just me and Emily in a room that suddenly felt too small. She stood, smoothing her dress, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. "David, please. Let me explain." "Explain?" I snapped, the word sharp enough to cut. "Explain how you're kissing another man in our home? On our anniversary?" Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. Not then. The pain was too raw, too immediate. I turned and walked out, the sound of her calling my name fading as I climbed into my car. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The city blurred past me as I drove, streetlights streaking like tears. My mind replayed every moment of our marriage, the late-night talks, the vacations, the fights we'd overcome. Had it all been a lie? When did she stop loving me? Or had she ever loved me at all? The questions gnawed at me, each one a fresh stab to the chest. I ended up at a diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and coffee that tasted like regret. My phone buzzed incessantly, Emily's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it. Instead, I stared at the worn Formica table, trying to piece together what had just happened. How had we gotten here? We'd been happy, hadn't we? The memory of her laughter, her hand in mine, felt like a cruel joke now. A waitress, her name tag reading Clara, slid a cup of coffee in front of me without asking. "Rough night?" she said, her voice kind but not prying. I nodded, unable to muster more. She didn't push, just refilled my cup when it got low. I sat there for hours, letting the hum of the diner drown out my thoughts. By the time I left, the sky was turning gray with dawn, and I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me, but I also wasn't going to let it slide. When I got home, Emily was gone. The house was eerily quiet, the balloons sagging against the ceiling. A note on the counter read, "I'm so sorry. I need time." Time. She needed time? I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. If she thought she could just walk away after this, she was wrong. I didn't sleep. Instead, I started digging. I went through her phone records, her emails, anything I could access. I wasn't proud of it, but betrayal has a way of stripping away pride. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Messages, dozens of them, between her and Mark. They'd been meeting for months. Lunches, late-night texts. Even a weekend trip she told me was for work. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but I kept going. I needed to know everything. By noon, I had a name and an address. Mark wasn't just some guy. He was married, with a wife named Sarah and 2 kids. They lived a few miles away, in a house probably not unlike ours. I stared at the address on my screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I supposed to do with this? Confront him? Confront her? Or something else entirely? I didn't know yet. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Emily and me anymore. There was another family caught in this mess, another heart about to break. And I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. The next morning, I stood outside a quaint suburban house, my knuckles white around a crumpled piece of paper with Sarah's address. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just driven here on autopilot, fueled by a mix of fury and desperation. What was I even doing? Knocking on a stranger's door to tell her that her husband was sleeping with my wife? I almost turned back. But then I saw a tricycle tipped over in the yard, a soccer ball nestled in the grass, and I thought of their kids, 2 boys, according to the social media I'd stalked. They deserved better than a father who'd wrecked 2 families. So did Sarah. So did I. I rang the bell. A woman in her late 30s opened the door, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. She looked tired but kind, the kind of person who'd offer you coffee before asking why you were there. "Can I help you?" she asked, her smile faltering as she registered my expression. "Sarah?" I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. She nodded, and I took a breath. "I'm David. My wife, she's been seeing your husband." Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, I thought she might slam the door, but she just stood there, gripping the towel like a lifeline. "Mark?" she whispered, as if testing the name. I nodded. "I caught them last night. In my house." She invited me in, her movements mechanical, like she was operating on instinct. The living room was warm, cluttered with toys and family photos. Mark smiling with his sons, Mark kissing Sarah's cheek. It made my stomach churn. We sat on opposite ends of a worn couch, and I told her everything. The anniversary surprise, the roses, the way Emily's eyes had betrayed her before her words did. Sarah listened, her hands twisting the towel until her knuckles were white. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I knew something was off. He's been distant, working late, always on his phone. I thought it was stress." Her voice cracked. I didn't think it was this. I didn't know what to say. I'd come here to share my pain. But now, seeing hers, I felt like an intruder. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I just thought you should know." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what to do now." Neither did I. But as we sat there, 2 strangers bound by betrayal, something shifted. We weren't just victims. We were survivors, and we could choose what came next. "Do you want to confront them?" I asked, the idea forming as I spoke. "Together?" Her eyes met mine, a spark of resolve breaking through the grief. "Yes," she said. "I want them to see what they've done." We spent the next hour planning. Sarah knew Mark's schedule. He'd be at his office downtown until 6. Emily, I assumed, was still hiding out somewhere, avoiding me. We decided to confront them separately, but simultaneously, catching them off guard. Sarah would go to Mark's office. I tracked down Emily. We exchanged numbers, promising to keep each other updated. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a pact. I left Sarah's house feeling lighter, like I'd handed off part of the weight crushing me. But as I drove back to the city, doubt crept in. What if Emily begged for forgiveness? What if I still loved her? The thought made me sick, but it was there, gnawing at me. I pushed it aside and focused on the plan. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice. I found Emily at her sister's apartment, a small place across town. She opened the door, her eyes red and puffy, and for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered her hand on Mark's arm, the way she'd called his name instead of mine. "David," she started, but I cut her off. "We need to talk. Now." She let me in, and we sat at her sister's tiny kitchen table. The air was thick with tension, every word a potential landmine. "Why?" I asked, the question I'd been wrestling with all night. "Why him? Why now?" She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of a placemat. "I don't know," she said softly. "It just happened. He listened to me, David. Things haven't been right with us for a while. Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they were. We'd been drifting, late nights at work, canceled plans, conversations that never went deeper than the surface. But I thought we were fixing it. I thought the anniversary would be a fresh start. You could have talked to me, I said, my voice breaking. Instead, you chose him. She started to cry, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Instead, I told her about Sarah, about the plan. Her eyes widened, fear replacing sorrow. You told his wife? Yes, I said. And she's confronting him right now. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, but I wasn't done. You don't get to walk away from this, Emily. You broke us. Both of us. I left her there, sobbing, and checked my phone. A text from Sarah. He's at the office. I'm going in. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment they'd face the consequences. Sarah's text lit up my phone as I sat in my car, the engine still running. He's at the office. I'm going in. My hands shook as I typed back. I just left Emily. She's a mess. Let me know how it goes. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a dramatic showdown. Maybe Mark begging for forgiveness. But whatever happened, I wanted him to feel the same gut-wrenching pain I'd felt. I drove aimlessly, the city a blur of lights and noise. My mind kept circling back to Emily's words. Things haven't been right with us for a while. She wasn't wrong, but it didn't justify her betrayal. I'd been working long hours, sure, trying to secure a promotion to give us the life we dreamed of, a bigger house, maybe a kid someday. I thought we were on the same page. Clearly, I'd been reading a different book. My phone buzzed again. Sarah, he denied it at first. Then he broke down. I'm leaving him. I stared at the words, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me. Mark was facing his reckoning, but it didn't erase the hole in my chest. I texted back, I'm sorry. What now? Her reply came quickly. Meet me at the park by the river. 7 p.m. We need to talk. The park was quiet when I arrived, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the grass. Sarah was already there, sitting on a bench, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked smaller than she had that morning, like the confrontation had drained something vital from her. I sat beside her, leaving a careful distance between us. He tried to lie, she said without looking at me. Said it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. But I saw the texts. It wasn't just physical. Her voice wavered, but she held it together. He's been telling her he loves her. The words hit like a punch. Emily hadn't said that part, hadn't mentioned love. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. Did he say how long? 6 months, she said, her eyes fixed on the river. 6 months of lies. I nodded, the timeline matching what I'd found in Emily's emails. 6 months of stolen moments, of secrets kept from both of us. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him to get out, she said, her voice hardening. I don't care where he goes, but he's not coming back to our house. Not to our boys. I admired her resolve, but I couldn't match it. Not yet. Emily was still my wife, and despite everything, a part of me wanted to understand why she'd done this. I don't know what to do about Emily, I admitted. I'm angry, but I still love her. Sarah turned to me, her eyes soft with empathy. I get it. I loved Mark too. But love doesn't mean we let them hurt us again. Her words lingered, heavy with truth. We sat in silence, watching the river reflect the fading light. For the first time since last night, I didn't feel alone. Sarah understood, not just the pain, but the confusion, the longing for answers that might never come. What if we made them face us together? She said suddenly. Both of them. Make them see what they've done to us. The idea was bold, reckless even, but it sparked something in me. How? I asked. We invite them to a neutral place, she said. A restaurant, maybe. We lay it all out. Everything we know, everything we've lost. No hiding, no excuses. I hesitated. The thought of sitting across from Emily and Mark, forcing them to confront their lies, was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if they don't come? They will, Sarah said with a certainty I envied. They owe us that much. We spent the next hour hashing out details. We'd meet at a quiet bistro downtown, a place neither couple had history with. We'd send the invitations separately, making it clear this wasn't optional. Sarah's determination was contagious, and by the time we parted ways, I felt a flicker of hope. not for saving my marriage, but for reclaiming my dignity. That night, I sent Emily a text. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the Willow Bistro. Be there. Her reply was almost immediate. Okay, I'll come. No apologies, no explanations, just agreement. I didn't know if that was a good sign or a bad one. I barely slept, my mind racing with what I'd say, how I'd keep my emotions in check. When morning came, I called in sick to work and spent the day preparing. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, every question I needed answered. Why had she chosen him? What did he give her that I couldn't? And most importantly, did she regret it? By the time I arrived at the Willow Bistro, my nerves were frayed. Sarah was already there, seated at a corner table, her posture rigid but composed. She gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of our shared mission. We were in this together, two strangers turned allies by circumstance. Emily and Mark arrived separately, their faces pale and drawn. Emily's eyes met mine briefly before dropping to the floor. Mark avoided looking at either of us, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The air was thick with tension as they sat across from us, the table a battlefield waiting for the first shot. The Willow Bistro was dimly lit, its soft jazz and clinking glasses a cruel contrast to the storm brewing at our table. Emily sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between me and the tablecloth. Mark, beside her, looked like he wanted to bolt, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the edge of the table. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, her nod giving me the courage to start. You both know why we're here, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You've been lying to us for months. We deserve to know why. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. Mark cleared his throat, his voice low and defensive. Look, this wasn't planned. It just happened. Sarah's laugh was sharp, cutting through the air. It just happened? For 6 months? You expect us to believe that? Mark flinched, his eyes flicking to Emily for support, but she stayed silent, her gaze fixed on her hands. I leaned forward, my anger simmering just below the surface. I planned a surprise for our 10th anniversary, I said, my eyes locked on Emily. I came home with roses, a reservation, everything to remind you of us. And you were with him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I pressed on. Why, Emily? What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything, she whispered, her voice breaking. It wasn't about you. I was lonely. You were always working, always distracted. Mark was there. Her words were a knife, twisting deeper because they held a grain of truth. I'd been consumed by work, thinking it was for our future. But I hadn't seen her slipping away. Still, that didn't excuse her. You could have talked to me, I said. Instead, you chose to destroy us. Sarah turned to Mark, her voice icy. And you? You have 2 boys at home. Did you think about them when you were sneaking around with her? Mark's face reddened. I love my kids, he said. This wasn't about them. Then who was it about? Sarah snapped. You? Her? Because it sure as hell wasn't about your family. The table fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. I could see Emily trembling, her shoulders hunched as if she could shrink away from the truth. But there was no escaping it now. Sarah and I had laid bare their lies, and the guilt was written across their faces. I'm sorry, Emily said finally, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, David. Her words hit me like a wave, threatening to pull me under. I wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the love we'd had. But the image of her with Mark was burned into my mind, a wound too fresh to ignore. You don't get to say that now, I said. Not after this. Sarah reached under the table, her hand brushing mine in a quiet gesture of support. It was enough to keep me grounded. We're not here to forgive you, she said, addressing both of them. We're here to make sure you understand what you've done. To us, to your kids, to everything we built. Mark shifted uncomfortably. What do you want from us? We said we're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said. You don't get to walk away and pretend it didn't happen. Sarah's kicking you out, Mark. And Emily, I paused, my throat tight. I don't know what's next for us, but I know I can't trust you anymore. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Emily tried to explain, her words tumbling over each other, but they felt hollow. Mark mostly stayed silent, his earlier bravado gone. By the time we left, I felt drained but strangely empowered. Sarah and I had faced them together, and we'd held our ground. Outside the bistro, Sarah and I stood under a street lamp, the night air cool against my skin. That was harder than I thought, she admitted, her voice soft. Yeah, I said, but it felt right. She nodded. What are you going to do about Emily? I sighed, the weight of the question settling over me. I don't know. Part of me wants to try to fix it, but I don't think I can. She touched my arm, a small gesture that meant more than words could. You don't have to decide tonight. Just don't let her make you feel like this is your fault. We parted ways, promising to check in the next day. As I drove home, I felt a strange clarity. The confrontation hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me something back, control. For the first time since I'd walked in on Emily and Mark, I felt like I could choose my next step. When I got home, the house was still empty. Emily hadn't come back. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where I'd found them, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. I'd fight for myself, for my future, whatever that looked like. Days turned into weeks, and the house remained a ghost of what it used to be. Emily had moved out, staying with her sister while we figured things out. I didn't know what that meant anymore. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional text from Sarah, checking in like a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. I threw myself into work, hoping it would dull the ache, but it didn't. Every night, I came home to the same empty rooms, the same unanswered questions. Why hadn't I seen the signs? Could I have stopped this? The guilt crept in, whispering that I'd failed her somehow, that my absence had driven her to Mark. But Sarah's words echoed louder. Don't let her make you feel like this is your fault. One evening, Sarah called. I found something, she said, her voice tense. Mark's been hiding money. A separate account. I think he was planning to leave me even before we confronted them. I sat up, my heart racing. What do you mean? I went through his laptop, she admitted. There's an account with thousands of dollars, transfers going back months, and emails he was looking at apartments. For him and Emily. The revelation hit like a freight train. Emily hadn't just cheated, she'd been planning a future with him. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm hiring a lawyer, Sarah said. I'm not letting him get away with this. You should check Emily's accounts too. If they were in this together, you need to protect yourself. She was right. That night, I dug deeper into Emily's financials, something I'd avoided out of some misplaced sense of respect. What I found confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Withdrawals, transfers to the same account Mark was using. They'd been building a nest egg, a safety net for their new life. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated. I called Sarah the next day, and we met at the same diner where I'd spent that first night. Clara, the waitress, gave me a knowing nod as she poured our coffee. Sarah slid a folder across the table, bank statements, emails, proof of their plans. This is enough for both of us to take them to court, she said. Not just for divorce, but for damages. Emotional distress, fraud, whatever we can get. I hesitated. The idea of dragging this through court felt like pouring salt on an open wound. But the alternative, letting them walk away unscathed, was worse. I'm in, I said. Let's make sure they feel this. We hired a lawyer together, a sharp woman named Linda who specialized in messy divorces. She laid out our options: file for divorce, sue for emotional distress, and potentially go after the hidden assets. It was a long shot, she warned, but the paper trail was strong. Sarah and I agreed to split the costs, pooling our resources to hit them where it hurt. The legal process was grueling. Every deposition, every meeting, forced me to relive the betrayal. Emily's lawyer argued she'd been unhappy, as if that justified her actions. Mark's defense was no better, painting him as a man caught in a moment of weakness. But Linda was relentless, presenting the evidence with surgical precision. Outside the courtroom, Sarah and I grew closer. Not romantically. Neither of us was ready for that. But as friends who understood each other's pain. We'd grab coffee after meetings, share stories about our lives before the betrayal. She told me about her boys, how she was shielding them from the worst of it. I told her about the dreams I'd had with Emily, the future that no longer existed. One night, after a particularly brutal deposition, Sarah invited me to her house for dinner. Her boys were with their grandparents, and the quiet was a welcome change. We cooked together a simple pasta dish, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed. It felt foreign, like a muscle I'd forgotten how to use. "You're stronger than you think," Sarah said as we sat at her kitchen table. "You could have fallen apart, but you didn't." "So are you," I said. "Your kids are lucky to have you." She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I just want them to be okay. That's all that matters now." As I drove home that night, I realized something. I was starting to heal. Not completely. The pain was still there, a dull ache that flared up at random moments. But I was moving forward. Sarah had given me that, not just through our shared fight, but through her quiet strength. The lawsuit progressed, and by the time we reached mediation, Emily and Mark were visibly worn down. They'd been forced to confront their lies in front of lawyers, judges, and us. It wasn't revenge, not exactly, but it was justice, and it felt good. The mediation room was sterile, all white walls and polished wood, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos we'd brought with us. Emily sat across from me, her face pale, her eyes hollow. Mark was beside her, his usual confidence replaced by a defeated slump. Sarah and I sat together, our lawyer Linda between us, her folder of evidence a silent threat. Linda spoke first, laying out the case, the hidden accounts, the months of deception, the emotional toll on both families. "Our clients are seeking full disclosure of assets, compensation for emotional distress, and punitive damages," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "We have evidence of premeditated fraud, which strengthens our position." Emily's lawyer, a nervous man in a cheap suit, tried to counter. "My client acknowledges her mistakes, but this was a personal failing, not a financial conspiracy." Mark's lawyer echoed the sentiment, but their arguments felt weak against the weight of the bank statements and emails. I watched Emily as they spoke, searching for the woman I'd married. She was still beautiful, even in her shame, but she was a stranger now. The love I'd felt was buried under layers of hurt, and I wasn't sure I could ever dig it out again. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "You planned a life without me," I said, looking at Emily. "You took our marriage, our trust, and you threw it away. I just want to know why." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like remorse. "I was scared," she said. "I felt like I was losing myself in our marriage." Mark made me feel seen. Her words stung, but they also clarified something. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about her running from something deeper, something we'd both ignored. "You should have told me," I said. "We could have fixed it." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know. I'm so sorry, David." Mark's statement was less heartfelt. He apologized to Sarah, but it felt rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. Sarah didn't respond, just stared at him with a mix of pity and disgust. The mediator proposed a settlement. Emily and Mark would return the hidden funds, split evenly between Sarah and me. We'd also receive a modest sum for emotional distress. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to feel like a victory. More importantly, it forced them to face the consequences of their choices. We signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. Or at least, that part was. The divorce proceedings were next, and I knew they'd be just as painful. But as Sarah and I left the building, I felt a weight lift. We'd held them accountable, together. Outside, the air was crisp, the first hint of fall in the breeze. Sarah turned to me, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. "We did it," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We did." We grabbed coffee at a nearby cafe, debriefing the mediation like soldiers after a battle. "What's next for you?" she asked. I sighed, stirring my coffee. "Divorce, I guess. Then I don't know. A fresh start, maybe." She nodded. "Same. I'm selling the house. Too many memories. The boys and I need something new." We talked for hours, about her kids, my job, the small things that made life worth living despite the pain. By the time we parted, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and decisions. Emily and I met to divide our assets, a process that felt like carving up our past. She tried to talk, to rebuild some kind of connection, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before. The sessions were hard, forcing me to face not just Emily's betrayal, but my own role in our marriage's cracks. I'd been absent, too focused on work, too quick to assume we were fine. It didn't excuse her, but it helped me understand. Sarah and I stayed in touch, our friendship growing stronger. She invited me to her boys' soccer game, and watching them play, cheering from the sidelines, felt like a glimpse of a life I could still have, one filled with connection, not isolation. As the divorce neared its end, I started to see a path forward. Not with Emily, but for myself. I was more than the man she'd betrayed. I was someone who could rebuild, who could find joy again. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday, the courtroom as gray as the sky outside. Emily and I stood before the judge, signing away 10 years of marriage in a matter of minutes. She looked at me as we left, her eyes pleading for something. Forgiveness, closure, I wasn't sure. I just nodded and walked away. Back home, I packed the last of her things, boxing up photos, clothes, the small mementos of a life we'd shared. It wasn't cathartic, not like I'd hoped. It was just sad. But with each box I sealed, I felt a little lighter, like I was shedding the weight of her betrayal. Sarah called that evening, her voice bright despite the day's gloom. "It's done?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Yours?" "Last week," she said. "I'm officially a single mom now." We laughed, a bittersweet sound that held more strength than sorrow. She invited me to a barbecue at her new place, a small rental across town, a fresh start for her and her boys. I agreed, eager for a change of scenery. The barbecue was chaotic in the best way. Sarah's sons, Jake and Ethan, ran around the backyard, kicking a soccer ball with reckless abandon. Neighbors and friends mingled, their laughter filling the air. Sarah moved through the crowd with ease, her smile genuine for the first time since we'd met. I helped her grill, flipping burgers and joking about our terrible cooking skills. It felt normal, like a glimpse of the life I could build. As the sun set, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the kids chase fireflies. "You ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't found out?" she asked. I nodded. "All the time. But I'm glad we did. It hurts, but it woke me up. I was sleepwalking through my marriage." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Me too. I was so focused on keeping things together for the boys, I didn't see how broken it all was." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared understanding. I realized then that Sarah had become more than an ally. She was a friend, maybe the best one I'd ever had. Not because we'd been through the same hell, but because we'd chosen to climb out of it together. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. I moved into a smaller apartment, one that didn't echo with memories of Emily. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. The canvases were messy, full of raw emotion, but they were mine. Therapy helped too, giving me tools to navigate the guilt and anger that still surfaced. Sarah and I kept meeting up, coffee, soccer games, the occasional dinner. Her boys started calling me Uncle David, a title that made my heart ache in a good way. I wasn't replacing their father, but I was part of their lives, and that meant something. One day, I ran into Emily at a grocery store. She looked tired, older, like the weight of her choices had settled into her bones. "David," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" I agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. We sat in the store's cafe, sipping coffee that tasted like cardboard. She told me she'd ended things with Mark, that she was in therapy, trying to understand why she'd thrown our marriage away. "I miss you," she said. "I know I don't deserve you, but I do." I listened, letting her words wash over me. But they didn't reach the place they used to. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said finally. "But it's not me anymore." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and we parted ways. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain, just acceptance. I was free. That night, I called Sarah, telling her about the encounter. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm ready to move on." She laughed, a warm sound that made me smile. "Good. Because Jake's got a game this weekend, and he's expecting Uncle David to cheer louder than anyone." I grinned, already looking forward to it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And with Sarah and her boys by my side, I knew I'd be okay. We'd both lost everything, but we'd found something better, ourselves.